Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining. It's good to see you guys. Gonna dive in. Tonight will be kind of finishing up just surveying the landscape of getting to know who Gen Z is as a generation and faith challenges and those kind of things. We're going to wrap some of that up and then start talking about more practical stuff. So my hope is that tonight, we'll start getting into that. We'll have another session next week, talking just more practical stuff. And then after that, I hope to kind of do mostly either a Q&A or a get to know you kind of thing with some of our teenagers. I'll try to get a mix of them if they're willing to be involved. Which I think
Is your phone standing by?
So that's kind of what I foresee the rest of the class being. I want to start off with a couple passages that I've actually asked Zach Haley to read. So thank you, Zach. Just a brief little devotional thought. So Zach, I'll turn it over to you. The first text he'll read is Acts chapter 20. There's going to be two short little verses to get us to be thinking about young people.
Yeah, so this is Acts 20. We're going to read 7 through 12. Verses 7 through 12. Acts 20, 7 through 12. On the first day of the week, where we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. And he prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered. And a young man named Eutychus was sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul was talking still longer. And and being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him into his arms, he said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a long while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive, and were not a little comforted.
It's kind of a weird way to say that at the end, not a little comforted. I think they mean like great. They were greatly comforted. But yeah. So thank you, Zach. Let's just kind of debrief this one first, as Jennifer's joining us here. Hello.
Hi.
Jennifer, we are in Acts chapter 20.
Okay.
So Zach just read a passage that probably most of us are familiar with. It's kind of, in some ways, I don't know if this is supposed to be a fun or a funny story, but it's definitely interesting that this little story is in Scripture. So Paul is preaching, and from what it sounds like, he's going to have to leave soon, so he decides to preach longer. And he's preaching so late into the night that there's this young boy, don't know exactly how old, but he's described as a youth, and he falls asleep during the sermon, and he falls out of the window, and he dies. And Paul stops preaching, and he goes and he resurrects this kid, brings him back from the dead, and then he goes and he keeps on preaching. And they're comforted, greatly comforted, that this youth is okay. And I want to this is just a funny story to me. I don't know what you guys think, but I just want to stop for a second, and I want to reflect on this story, and I want us to think about, what does this tell us? Does this say anything about the church, about young people, especially in light of some of the things we've been discussing? What what do you hear in this story? I'll just open it up to everyone. What stands out?
I mean, I was going to say it's more pertaining to preachers, that they shouldn't be long-winded or they might literally kill people.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those passages that as a preacher should put the fear of the Lord in you, you know. I don't think I'd have the power to bring someone back from the dead. Maybe that's
Yeah.
my little faith, but Paul didn't seem to mind too much. But yeah, what else?
Well, I wondered if teenagers need more sleep than they often get, and that perhaps that factored into it. So he just by that time it's late in the night and he's sitting quietly, and perhaps not even used to sitting quietly like that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, even 2,000 years ago, you know, we kind of had this problem. You know, teenagers need sleep, and I don't know if he's forced to stay up late or if he was trying to. But what else? What else can we see?
Well, I was wondering why he was sitting in a window. Like, why would the little boy be sitting in a window?
Yeah,
That doesn't seem safe.
that's a good question. So if we were to dig a little deeper, why didn't anyone stop him from sitting in a window? You know, we can look at this from two sides. We can look at it from the side of like the characteristic grumpy old man in church who looks up at that kid and says, hey, get down from there, like stop being dumb, you know. But we can also look at it from the side of just church care. Like, was the church looking out for this kid? Or were they so invested in what Paul had to say, they were neglecting this young man? They weren't even aware of the fact that he was in danger, potentially. That's good. Any other observations?
Well, I got to hand it to the kid for being there in the first place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And secondly is that how many of us, and it affects me, and as we get older, we get sleepier. And so unless the preacher's really on top of things, and you might say keep things going, it's awful easy to just kind of drift off. Kyle?
Yeah, I'll try to keep
No, you're
you
doing
awake.
great. Good. Keep us awake. You are.
Anything else? So, I was just thinking that, like, it's just interesting, you know, mostly we read the story and we're focusing on Paul. This boy falls out of the window. Paul heals him, no big deal. But how often do these kind of things happen where our young people are neglected, our young people are put in dangerous situations, and the church doesn't seem to care very much until that young person is gone? And I don't know. I think that has something to say about our churches. I think this story teaches us more about young people than we think, and maybe not so much about how entertaining our preachers are. Anyways, that's the first verse, kind of a negative example where Paul literally kills a young person, brings him back, so that's good. But let's look at Paul doing things well. Zach, you want to read the next one? 1 Timothy chapter 4.
So we are in 1 Timothy 4, starting in verse 12.
Yeah, 12 through 16.
Let no one despise you for your youth, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given to you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things, immerse yourself in them, so that you may so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so, you will save both yourself and your hearers.
Thanks, Zach. So, again, keeping in mind some of the things we've been talking about, what stands out to you in this passage? Why would I have Zach read this passage to us?
Well, maybe because, the first part of it, it says, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young. Like, being young is a bad thing, or like you're stupid, or you don't know as much because you don't have as much life experience.
Yeah.
Very
Very good. What else? Oh, Stan, I can't hear you. Hold on. You got to unmute yourself.
No, how old is Timothy? Does anybody know?
That's a good question. People go back and forth. I don't know if we can really know. But I don't think he was 40.
Oh,
no. I would say very confidently that he was less than 40, possibly less than 30.
Because that's what I was thinking. Seems like in the Jewish cult, well, Jesus was 30 when he started the ministry, and I was thinking actually Timothy was early 20s at that time.
It could be.
Which means, did the Jewish culture at that time really, or even our own youth, really pay much attention to even a 22-year-old kid?
Mm-hmm.
That's what kind of came to my mind.
Yeah.
And do we listen to our own youth?
Yeah, that's good. Anything else?
Well, all through we've been reading First and Second Timothy, and all through that he's so tender with Timothy. I mean, he just talks about how much he loves him and how important he is to the work, and just to me it's just so touching, and he's makes Timothy. Surely Timothy must have felt built up by the things that Paul was telling him.
Yeah, and Paul actually several times calls him my son,
Right.
even though we know he wasn't actually his son. Yeah, I mean, really what I see here is when we take into account the fact that Timothy was very likely less than 30 years old, think about all that Paul entrusted him to do. I mean, can you imagine having a 25-year-old person come in and basically run your church? He has him install elders and teach them. I mean, this young man is doing a lot, and Paul has invested in him, and Paul has turned things over to him and given him a very significant role in his ministry. So I think we can see a really good, healthy relationship between someone who's older mentoring someone who's younger, and not just treating them like some kind of pupil, but basically as an equal in a lot of ways. So I wanted to start off with that, especially as we start thinking about what it actually looks like to be a mentor, be with people. And I think that's kind of what we're striving for, is that kind of relationship where it almost becomes familial. I mean, it does for Paul. He's willing to call him son, and this is the kind of thing that we're looking for. And we can see that Timothy is successful because of Paul's mentorship and because of how he went about doing it. So that's what I want us to all strive for. So just real quickly, last week we talked about some markers of the faith of Gen Z. We talked about how they are growing up in a post-Christian world where Christianity is not the center or the norm. We talked about how they enjoy experiential faith. That's important to them, and over and above more cognitive or intellectual faith. They have a high desire to make a difference in the world, and how that's an opportunity for us as a church to better connect with this generation, because as Christians, who's better suited to make a difference in the world? We talked about also just their commitment is more about community than ideology. They, I wouldn't say they're less intellectual, but they're less concerned about drawing lines because of what people think or believe. And so our challenge as a church is, how do we display those kind of things that they're looking for, while at the same time also steering them towards things that might be in their own blind spots. We have our blind spots, they have their blind spots, but we need to start with some kind of common ground, some kind of mutuality. And we also talked about how Gen Z is not necessarily rejecting the faith of or in Jesus. They're really more rejecting the church. And it's not that they are not spiritual or not interested. It's really that they've never really thought about it all that much. They haven't taken the time to really dive in or commit to anything. But those teens that are highly connected with a church or highly invested spiritually are doing well. Just like they're reaching the same kind of markers that adults are. So there's a lot of hope there. So I want to share some information from this book. I'll show it to you. It's called Almost Christian by Kendra Cressy Dean. And she is kind of like a Christian sociologist and theologian. She does this big study. It's called the National Study of Youth and Religion. From 2003 to 2005, she surveys all these teenagers. So this is millennials. So the information here is old, but I think it's still good, and I want to share some things from it. So it's this massive study on adolescents and their faith, and I want to just share 5 findings that come from their study, and maybe also compare it a little bit to Gen Z. This is kind of the last landscape stuff I want to do, because it leads into I think just one of the major problems and how we can actually combat it. So I think really this information shows, like, in a lot of ways this is the same old problem. It's just a little bit different of a twist with this new generation. So here are 5 findings that they've come up with. They summarize it down to 5 things. The first is that most American teenagers have a positive view of religion and openness, but otherwise don't give it much thought. So again, that's from 2005. And we discovered from 2018, Christian sociologists were finding pretty much the same thing. So, it's not like they're rejecting religion. They're just not all that interested. And I wanted to kind of ask, like, just reflectively, why do you think young people have this posture towards religion? That they're not necessarily, they're open to it, but they don't really give it much thought. Any ideas why they'd have that posture towards religion?
Well, doesn't school have something to do with it?
What do you mean?
Well, when I was in school, we had we could talk about God, and we could just so many things of references to God has been removed. So it's like it's neutral territory, and so unless you're hearing about it at home or you're already going to church, it's like, when are you going to hear about it?
Yeah. So it's kind of that idea of the post-Christian society. That might be, I'd really say the 90s was the decline of that. And then when you get into by the 2000s, that's kind of where you start to see that post-Christian society emerge. So I think that could be a big reason. Yeah.
I think it has to do with the way society, I mean, how we're so focused on, I need something right now, drive-throughs, and I'm going to order on Amazon and get it next day or in 2 days. Everything is about as quick as possible, and they need everything right now. So to have somebody go and sit down in church for a couple of hours on a Sunday morning, it's like, that just seems like way too much time that they could be doing other things. And half the time, honestly, you walk through a church, like when I'm counting people or doing whatever, there are so many people on their phones. Granted, they could be looking at scripture or whatever, but, sometimes they're looking at Facebook or answering texts. And it's just so hard for people to focus, I think, with technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you bring up a couple good things. Like one, just instant gratification. Again, some of us did not grow up in that kind of time. And imagine that's all you know. It's not their fault, is it? I wouldn't say it is. And time is money. I mean, you think about how overloaded they are with everything: school, sports, other extracurricular, family time. Our society is just faster paced now. And so, yeah, why sit in church for a couple hours or whatever, It's a good point. Also, I'll be sure to put my phone away when you're walking up and down the aisles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought about texting you while you were preaching to see if you had your phone on you, but
I always have it on silent. That's
Okay.
another generational gap is a lot of people, older people, leave their phone on noise all the time, and young people never have their phone volume on. They never do.
Well, something that I thought of was they don't think that it's cool, because they see, when they look around at church, they mostly see old people and that are interested in church and God, and maybe they just see it as something that's not interesting because the older people are doing it.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's definitely something to the idea that if all the old people are doing it, it may not be cool. There's a reason there are no teenagers on Facebook anymore. And it's you guys, to be quite honest. It's not cool anymore. They don't want to see your memes. They have their own memes.
Yeah, I think Corey and Nicole really hit the nail on the head in that in this day and age, what do I get out of it?
Yeah.
It's a waste of time. I can get everything I want. What's in it for me?
Yeah. We're gonna get. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's just that there doesn't seem to be much interest in there because in the society we live in, it's a me society.
Yeah.
What's in it for me?
For sure. And again, we just need to keep reminding ourselves, they did not create that. These young people did not create the world they're growing up in. So, yeah, Zach.
I also think a big thing is with information as accessible as it is nowadays, you can be a pro. Actually, I think Neil Tyson said, like the biggest problem today is you can like learn a lot about something really fast and you can think you figured it out. But like, it's like we can believe that we fully understand something when we don't, you know? And so there's a, like, if the Bible were to ever come up, if there's a full story, there's an entire, you know, religion in general, this is a generation that knows how to navigate so fast and get all the information that they want to know about something. And I was just talking to Elaine about this, you know, we also live in a time where there's some of the most magnificent like shows on television and pieces of like art and stuff are like kind of crammed into 2-minute videos where you can kind of watch like a quick overview of it, and then we're on to the next thing. So it's like, it has everything to do with that attention that a lot of people are talking about, but also just like, we're on to the next thing. We're on to the next thing by the next day. WandaVision comes out. It's like the first Marvel TV series. It's really, really good. We talk about it for a day. We're on to the next thing. You know, it's just nothing to base your life around, you know? That's just kind of how like consumption of information works nowadays, you know?
Yeah, it's like binge watching everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I think one more thing on the technology front as well. You can type anything into YouTube or to Google, and you're going to get not necessarily what the Bible says about things, but you're going to get multiple different people's opinions on things that aren't always correct. And so we can be easily swayed by that. Well, it was on YouTube, so I mean, you know the saying, it was on the internet, so it's got to be true.
Yeah. And nowadays, what's even worse is not only will you like see multiple sources and it may not be, you know, a good source, but nowadays they will show you what they know you want to see so that you'll keep clicking. Again, go watch The Social Dilemma. It will blow your mind. Two of us could Google the same thing and we'd probably get different results because they know what you want to, what will keep you clicking. So, and then how do you determine what's true when that's the reality? Okay, the second finding, most teenagers mirror their parents' religious faith. I don't think this one's all that surprising to us. They conform to a high degree up to a certain age. In this study, they were finding around 18, which again makes sense. I would say it's possibly younger now in Gen Z, especially because of how prevalent in the last few years things like young people being involved in politics and stuff like that, and just being more informed, being more active socially and politically. I think they'd be more likely to break with their parents earlier in different things. But what they found basically is that parents matter most, and when it comes to the religious identity of young people. We'll talk more about that in a second. I want to kind of blitz through these a little bit. The third finding is that teenagers lack a theological language with which to express their faith or interpret their experience of the world. They found out by having conversations with, you know, thousands of kids that a lot of them don't even know how to express their faith, and they don't know how to process or interpret their experience through that kind of lens and that kind of language. And what they were kind of realizing is that a lot of times we teach things like sports, but we expose them to faith instead of teaching them faith. So they lack the theological language to really understand, you know, basically we just water things down too much and we think as long as they're here, they're kind of sponging it in, and that should be enough. Number 4, a minority of teens, but a significant minority, say religious faith is important and that it makes a difference in their lives. These teenagers are doing better in life on a number of scales compared to their less religious teens. So again, this is something we kind of talked about, is characteristic of Gen Z as well. For those teens that were kind of marked as what they would call highly devoted, and they had different characteristics that they had to meet, like how often they went to church, how often they prayed, how often they, did those kind of things. Those who were considered highly devoted in other areas of their life were, doing better, as they say, just comparatively. And I kind of brought up the question for me, what does doing better look like? I think we have to be careful about even that. Does that mean that they were conforming to societal norms or Christian subculture? Were they living healthier, choosing not to, or less likely to smoke, or have premarital sex or do drugs or whatever? And that's true that they found that for the most part. Or is it because we're anesthetizing our kids in the church? We have to really think about what does doing better mean? What do we want our kids to look like? And again, how are we accomplishing that? If we are sheltering them, if we are kind of numbing them to the world outside, are they going to be prepared for that world? I've seen so often teens grow up in a very conservative faith, and they're really taught just how bad the world is. And then they leave and they go to college and they start hearing things from these bad people that actually make some sense. And they start seeing other people from different religions that are actually quite compassionate. And it really starts to completely deconstruct their faith, because they were taught that these people on the outside are so bad. And in their experience, that doesn't seem to be true. Even some of the ideas that they teach, that they never learned, seem to be pretty intelligent. And a lot of times they don't have the tools to process that deconstruction. And so instead of being taught the faith, they were kind of just anesthetized to the outside world. And it looked like they were doing pretty well, but they weren't ready to face the outside world and to, think critically and have the relationships to work through those difficulties. Brian Simmons, if you guys know him, he was the preacher at Metro. He taught at Cascade, he's taught at OC. He wrote a book called Wandering the Wilderness. It talks a lot about this idea of teenagers transitioning into adulthood and a lot of times lacking the tools that they needed. The church never taught them how to do that. And then so now number 5, the last one. Many teenagers enact and espouse a religious outlook that is distinct from traditional teachings of most world religions, an outlook called moralistic therapeutic deism. Moralistic therapeutic deism. I want to talk about this. This is a concept that I think, I can't remember exactly, but I think Christian Smith, who was he did a big study in kind of the 90s that she kind of follows up on in this book, Dr. Dean. She follows up on this study that Christian Smith does, and I think he coins this term. I could be wrong though. But I want to talk about this idea, moralistic therapeutic deism. So their findings are saying that a lot of these, Christian teens, their faith, when they express it, sounds a lot less like the teachings of Jesus and a lot more like this other religion, which they call moralistic therapeutic deism. But I'm just going to say MTD because that's a lot easier. And I will say this also, obviously their study is focusing on teenagers, and so they're going to say that a lot of teenagers, this is their faith. I have found that there are a lot of adults that are exactly the same. A lot of adults in our churches, whatever denomination, it doesn't matter. They are, under the Christian banner, their faith looks a lot more like this moralistic, therapeutic deism than it does like the Christian faith. So let me just tell you how they described this other religion, if you will, or just this other religious outlook. So here are like the basic tenets as they've kind of defined and discovered. MTD tenets. One is a God exists who created and orders the world and watches over life on earth. So far, so good? Yeah. Number 2 is God wants people to be good, nice, and fair to each other as taught in the Bible or by most world religions. Which, that doesn't sound too bad. Here's where it kind of takes a turn. Number 3 is the central goal in life is to be happy and feel good about oneself. Number 4, God is not involved in my life except when I need God to resolve a problem. And what they mean by that is God is not concerned about the daily little aspects of my life. And mostly I interact with God when something goes wrong. The basic idea is, there's not this daily interaction between me and God, And then the last one is good people go to heaven when they die. So this is something that sounds a lot like the Christian faith, but it's kind of missing some key parts. And when I hear a lot of Christians talk about faith and, sometimes this is the kind of stuff I hear. And then, like, when you think about how faith is talked about in, like, broader society, these are the kind of ideas that they're hearing. I like to think about it like this. If you really wanted to turn someone against God, if you wanted to turn a bunch of Christians against God, probably the less successful tactic would be to go in and be like, they're wrong, you're wrong, let me refute you, here are all the reasons God doesn't exist, blah, blah, blah. Like, you might convince some people, but most people, when they're confronted with opposition, they don't go, let me hear you out on that one. Let me think through that. No, they dig in their heels and they say, you're my enemy. But if you really want to turn people away from an ideology, I think the best way to do it is just really water it down until it's nothing. And that's basically what this does. God exists. Like, let's not reject religion. God exists. God wants people to be good and nice. That's what the Bible teaches. That's what Buddha teaches. God wants you to be happy and to feel good about yourself. And, that should be your primary pursuit, is you should be happy. God doesn't really care about the nitty-gritty details. God's just there when I need him. And then finally, if I'm just a good person, I'll go to heaven. It's just, if I'm just a good person and my life, the net is positive towards the good, then I'll go to heaven. I mean, that's just a very watered down version of pretty much any religion, especially the Christian religion. And I think sometimes we do a disservice when our young people learn this, and also our young people learn the opposite, which is everyone in the world is evil. You got to really watch out for them. there's got to be a better way than these two options. And so I want to talk about a better way. But before I do, any thoughts or comments about this idea of moralistic therapeutic deism? Do you see this? Can you think about what the cause is? Can you think about a solution? Any ideas? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I think it's interesting that like the argument like about good people go to heaven. I think that also kind of bled into like that whole concept bleeds into kind of your last question that we were just all talking about how like the idea that like only Christians get to go to heaven, and only like only following a certain path gets you to heaven. It's kind of this general goodness, like most people around you, like it's like most people around you are good. Most people that I know are kind people. So why can't we all just go to heaven? And like you said, like that watering down of everything tends to like, you now as somebody that has to combat that, like if a younger person is like, well, most people are good, why can't we all go to heaven? As soon as you start deconstructing and saying like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, that pretty much is you stating, well, your people aren't good, or like, no, your friends aren't going to heaven and stuff like that. And then those heels dig in is kind of what like I see, right? Like, I just think that's interesting that when something is watered down, now disputing that is like a million times harder.
Yeah.
Without coming across like mean or trying to negate the way they feel,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about this idea of how tolerance is a high value in our society. And again, in some ways, like that's not a bad thing. Being a little more tolerant is probably something that a lot of us could use. But when tolerance becomes like, don't have any exclusive ideas, don't rock the boat, then that puts us in a tight spot, because unfortunately Jesus said some things that drew some lines in the sand. He said some things that require certain actions from us, and by default can exclude people who don't follow those things. And so how do we learn to profess that in a society that's very tolerant? Well, the easy way is just to kind of water things down and not really talk about it. And that's kind of what MTD does. So again, I'm not saying that we need to become more tolerant so that more Gen Zers will come to our church. I just think we need to find good ways to have those conversations. Because there are good ways. There are ways to do it. A lot of times we just take the more, we do one of the extremes. We either water it down, like moralistic therapeutic deism, or we become combative. And we draw really rigid lines in the sand, and everyone outside of that is against us. And that doesn't work super well either. Any other thoughts?
I was
Yeah.
gonna,
Go for
one
it.
thing that I've had a lot of conversations with my mom, I feel like in just recently, about what is really difficult, I think, about raising youth into teenhood is that they're taught in the church, any young Christian or any young person is taught right and wrong first. So you can't necessarily reason with someone whose brain isn't developed enough to understand the full reasoning behind why we don't do that and why we do that. And so I think what's hard is that transition from youth to teen years to young adults, of knowing when the right time to actually give them more depth and understanding of reasons to the why we don't do those things, because that will help. But I think I just remember having conversations with my mom. She never talked down to me, and she talked concepts with me sometimes that went over my head, but I think as I grew older, I was able to sort of conceptualize that for myself. And so I'm thankful that I was taught the why, even if maybe I wasn't ready to know the why, because not everything was such a rigid black and white, and wasn't such a rigid because I said so. And sometimes I think we throw these lines in the sand, and then we don't maybe give them the benefit of the doubt of giving them maybe some background or some emotional or applicable understanding so they can grow and maybe wrestle with it for a little while. But by the time that they're a teen or a young adult, they can look back on all those conversations and realize what that all means for the big picture.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, a lot of things there. First of all, the importance of that relationship with your mom as a place where you can safely have these conversations. I think we're going to see that is maybe the most important thing when it comes to young people grasping faith for themselves. And the idea of like letting them kind of wrestle with it, and when to introduce concepts. I mean, they're pretty smart. They can grasp some things and wrestle with things. Like you mentioned the answer, because I said so, right? I hate that answer so much. Like, I honestly think the reason people use that, when we're asking tough questions and someone says, because I said so, it's because they don't know the answer and they're too embarrassed to admit it. I can't think of a better reason. You're telling me that a teenager is asking tough questions and you can't at least admit either, I'm not exactly sure, or that's a good question, we should talk about it. You have to shut them down and say, because I said so. I mean, really, I think that just shows our own, again, anxiety. We don't know. We're afraid. So we're just going to shut it down and destroy that opportunity for that young person to think deeply about the faith. And here's the thing. If we do that too much, they're going to realize these Christians are kind of stupid. They don't even know the answers. I'm going to go somewhere else. This professor who's talking about whatever and how dumb Christians are is sounding pretty dang smart right about now, But I tell you, they're smarter than we give them credit. Last night at youth group, we were studying the ascension of Jesus, and they start asking these questions. I tell you, they were asking like, because we were talking about the Holy Spirit. Jesus promised, like, why did Jesus leave? He was promising the Holy Spirit, blah, blah, blah. And they were asking stuff like, so do we need the Holy Spirit to be saved? And they were asking like, can you receive the Holy Spirit if you haven't been baptized? I mean, goodness sakes, people, if we don't have at least either answers or point them in the right direction, or at least the patience to sit with them and say, man, that's a good question. I'm not even exactly sure. We should talk about that. If we don't have the patience for that, they're going to go somewhere else. They really will, But luckily, I had all the answers for them, of course. Just joking. Okay.
Let's see. Hey, Kyle, don't you think as an adult now sitting here, you talking about that, we're thinking, how can a child that age ask such great questions? All they're thinking about is football or their sports or school, and we don't give them the due for having the smarts to ask questions.
Yeah.
We think, they can't even think of that thing.
Yeah.
Or that thing.
This really draws us back to that first session where, because of our own anxiety and our fear towards young people, we'd much rather just look at them and say, oh yeah, these kids, they have short attention spans. They're always sitting there on their phone. They don't pay attention, blah, blah, blah. We make them the enemy. We blame things on them when they're a lot smarter. They want a lot more. They're hungry. They can think deeply. The problem is us adults have handed them these things. We're the ones who shortened their attention span. We're the ones who got them the phone. And not that those things are bad. I mean, the internet is not a bad thing. Phones are not a bad thing, but we need to develop that compassion for young people, and that recognition that they actually are hungry for these things. They do want to learn, and we need to have the patience to teach them deeply, and provide those opportunities. Okay. Anything else? Good stuff.
Oh, actually, one more thing, Kyle.
Sure.
On the idea that even we think that God is only interested in us at certain times. Let's see. So it takes me a long time to explain things. I was thinking of that song, "Jesus, Take the Wheel." I've heard the preachers do that one. We're driving the car until something happens bad, and then maybe Jesus can step in. And what I'm implying there is how often, especially as a kid growing up, the only time I can think about praying for something was when something was going bad. So, okay, let's talk to God. It's going bad. It's kind of like if you look at our bulletin, we got all these things. People are sick. We need jobs and stuff like that. And even in our prayers, I think, and kids, I think, see that as I've seen it. We don't thank God enough for those daily things in our life. And I'm thinking kids might see that. I don't know if they do or not.
Yeah.
Well, let's just pray to God because, somebody needs a job, but we don't hear enough about God's working in our happy daily lives or something. I don't know if that.
Yeah. Most of our prayer, I mean, honestly, I'm not saying that Newberg is rampant with MTD or anything, but a good example of even in our own church, most of our prayers in a corporate setting are centered around negative things that we need God's help for. And, how often do we just pray, Lord, let us be in your presence? Lord, let us thank you for all of these blessings. I mean, of course we do that, but this is a good example of how even just a little bit sometimes that's there. And then how much do they see that? I guess you pray for things when things are bad, and there's more. We need to teach them better. That's not when you pray. That's not the only time you pray, when things are going bad. So yeah, I mean, that's a good example. Okay, let's start getting into some practical stuff. So parents and other adults, this is the key to the success of our young people. And really what it comes down to is relationships. Actually forming relationships with these people. I want to talk about just, 3 different relationships real fast. That study, and really, any study will show you that parents are the number one influential factor in the development of children, especially when it comes to faith. They, in this study, in her book, she says the best way for youth to become more serious about religious faith is for parents to become more serious about theirs. Research is nearly unanimous on this point. Parents matter most in shaping the religious lives of their children. So again, I don't think that shocks us. I think that's pretty obvious. What I want us to think about are 2 things in that regard. And the first one is, are we really equipping parents? Honestly, this is something I struggle with, being a younger person, not being a parent yet. It's sometimes hard for me to know how to equip parents. I don't want to come across as like some know-it-all youth minister who, hasn't raised his own kids. And how do churches navigate that? We need to be mindful of how we're equipping parents and not just assume that they know what they're doing. I mean, my dad likes to say, like when you were born, because I was the first born, he's like, the nurses didn't give us a manual. You learn you learn as you go. And the second thing is, and this is crucial, if parents matter most, then we really need to focus on the kids who don't have parents who are spiritually minded. If their number one influence in their life when it comes to things that are spiritual, if that person is not spiritual, then we need to step it up. And I see a lot of churches that become very insular. Youth ministry is about our kids, and maybe they'll bring their friends sometimes. And that will be, how awesome will that be? Our friends, when our kids bring their friends to church, they're evangelizing them. We like to pat ourselves on the back because we have good, nice kids. Sounds kind of like MTV to me. So, parents matter most. The second is that other adults, non-parental units, other adults are the next most important factor. Those relationships. So we need to shed the misconception that teenagers just want adults to leave them alone. Because honestly, it's not true. Now, it may seem like that at first, and when we get to even more practical stuff like how do you actually walk up to a teenager and start a conversation, it will probably seem like you are the last person they want to talk to. But there's reasons for that, and it's not because they don't like you or they just want these old people to leave them alone. More adults means more opportunities to connect and learn and grow. One of the big things they talk about in youth ministry is how important it is to have a team of other adults. Because if I have like 30 teens from 6th through 12th grade, there's no way I'm going to be able to meet with all of them even in a month. Even in 3 months, probably, just because how busy everyone's lives are. So it's harder to reach them all unless you have more people helping. And the reality is, each one of you is going to be able to better connect with some of our teens than I can, because of your own life experiences, because of who you are going to better connect with some of our young people than I can. And I really believe that. So that's why other adults are really the next big factor. And it can't just be the youth minister. That's a huge start. It really is. But it can't just be the youth minister. And then the third is just thinking about the relationship with just the church at large. That's really last when it comes to these three. Teens connect better with adults or individuals than just the large church experience on Sunday mornings, because relationships open doors to opportunities. And young people, they just won't connect if they don't feel like they belong. They won't grow, and then they won't grow if they don't connect. So a lot of times, our young people step into our just congregational worship and they feel lost. They tune out. It's not relevant. A lot of these things we've heard already. But what can change that again is when they start to actually connect with other adults. You know, they already go to connect with their peers, but they'll stick around longer if they start connecting with other adults like you. And it provides for better opportunities for them to grow. Because to be honest, I mean, they're going to learn some things from each other when it comes to faith, but they're going to learn a lot more from people like you who have been walking it for longer or in just a more mature environment. And they want to know what that looks like when they're not under mom and dad's roof anymore. They want to get to know well-adjusted adults who are actually walking the walk, because they know they can learn from them and how to do it once they're doing it on their own. So I want to talk about this is kind of the last thing. Having all of us shift our mentality from faith as passing on information to passing on faith through relationship. So a lot of times, again, in the church, we think like, if our young people, if we can give them their own little group and we can give them these experiences and we can pass on these ideas, they'll form this Christian identity and they'll be okay. But the part that we neglect is actually making relationships with these people outside of just their own families or just the youth minister. So here's a quote from that other book I talked about. This is one of my favorite books in youth ministry, Contemplative Youth Ministry. He's the guy who talked about, you know, adults and teens make each other anxious. But his name's Mark Yaconelli. He says, what they're seeking is the companionship of adults who embody a different way of being. They're looking for adults who embody who they want to be and who will support them and help them get there. So it may not seem like it all the time, but they really are seeking companionship. I mean, if you think back to when you were young, I'm sure there were people that you looked up to, right? That hasn't changed. That's not something that's gone by the wayside. We will always look up to people who are older than us. You know, it's like kids who want to grow up too fast. It's just, that's kind of a natural way of life. So there are three things that I want us to think about. So this is getting into the practical stuff. And sorry if I'm like fire hosing too much information. If you guys have any questions or any thoughts, you know, please interrupt me. But these are three practical things I want us to start thinking about. What can we actually do? So right now it might be a little conceptual, but I want us to start thinking like, what can I actually do or say to make these things happen? There's three things that I think we need to do with our young people to help them, to help their faith become really a core identity for the rest of their lives. At least as far as we can. I mean, everyone has to make their own decisions, right? But there are three things. The first is belonging. Belonging. The second is accompaniment. And the third is empowerment. Belonging, accompaniment, and empowerment. So belonging, first one, far too often the church naturally marginalizes our young people. I want to pick on a few things. I don't think these are bad things, but just examples. We have classes. About 95% of the time, our classes are all segregated by age. The only exception really in our church is Koine, which we haven't done in over a year because of COVID. But almost all of our classes are segregated by age. Now, honestly, I'll just stop for a second and ask the question, why do you think that is? I think there's kind of an obvious answer, but why do you think we segregate all of us by age when it comes to our Christian education.
I think an obvious one would be just for sure, like peer relationships and being able to have kids of similar age or people of similar life phases to be able to relate to one another, so you can have, you know, comfort in discussion or, you know, asking questions and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, sometimes it's easier to dive into thing with your peer into concepts with your peers. Anyone else? I think maybe another one would be oh, sorry, Nicole, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was, but I forgot.
Oh,
my brain is usually fried by the end of the day. Just
no worries. Your
getting
square, you know, went green on me, so I wasn't sure. I think another obvious one is like, you know, intellectual levels. There are certain stories in the Bible that we don't talk about much with 5 and 6 year olds, like Lot and his daughters. I haven't heard a children's class on Lot and his daughters yet, although I think it would be pretty interesting. We cover Noah's Ark, but we don't really cover often what comes right after that, you know? Or when we cover Noah's Ark, we kind of gloss over the fact that all of these people were killed, you know? Like we focus on Noah and the animals and yay, you know? So, I mean, some of it is just like, you know, as you get older, you can wrestle with bigger questions, more complex ideas, and that's natural. But do we do ourselves a disservice sometimes if we always operate in that kind of a way? I mean, I think so. You know, we have children's worship during the sermon, you know, probably so that none of our kids fall asleep and fall out of the pew and die like Paul happened to Paul. We send them up where they can have a little more fun and learn something with Norma or whatever, you know. And again, I'm not against any of these things. I think that they can be good ways to teach kids in an age-appropriate way. But there are probably other ways we marginalize young people and don't even think about it. You know, again, we were talking about the church being relevant, and that's kind of almost a nasty word in Christian culture because Christians aren't supposed to be relevant. We're supposed to teach the truth, right? You know, like we can't just water stuff down and put on skinny jeans and have a rock and roll band up there, you know, because that's just folding to culture. But let me ask you this. Imagine as a young person walking into church and you're a few minutes late and you've got your Starbucks in your hand and you look up and there's a 16-year-old up there giving the opening announcements. I mean, how do you think a teenager would react if they walk into a church and they look up and they see a 16-year-old up there on stage leading the prayer or whatever? That would be awesome. They'd be like, whoa, like this church lets young people say stuff? I mean, immediately the walls start to crumble and they start to maybe be a little more interested. That's being relevant, I think, to our young people. Honestly, while they would probably like the skinny jeans and the rock band, I think what they would really like more is stuff like that. And instead of just like saying, okay, now we need to get a bunch of teenagers on stage because that'll make us a more relevant church. No, we're skipping a step. And the first step is making sure that they feel like they belong, you know, before we ask them to go do stuff for us so that we can be a more relevant church. We need to see them as primary participants and not on the periphery. And we need to recognize that discipleship begins with an invitation to belong. You look at what Jesus did as he found people and he said, follow me, come and join me, come watch what I do, come listen to me, come be a part of this. He made sure that people knew that they belonged. And that's what young people want. That's their deepest desire. You know, remember that first session we talked about what's our deepest desires for young people? They just want to belong and feel safe, because they don't always feel that way at school. They don't always feel that way at home. They want a place where they can feel like they don't have to have their defenses up, you know? So quick question. Oh yeah, Alina, go ahead. Go for it.
I was just going to say one thing. I feel like my teen years were not that long ago. And I'm in a very different phase of life.
They're old now.
I don't feel like they were that long ago.
They were 10 years ago.
It's not that long. I feel like I have a very vivid memory of my teen life in the church, though, because I was a very ambitious teen and I was also very outspoken, and that wasn't accepted in my church. And I remember having a desire, but also being kind of half drugged to ladies' classes. So like in regards to separating by age, I grew up only being separated by age. But then I think when I became a preteen and a young teen, I started going to like a ladies' class with my mom, like on a Wednesday night or something. And I never felt validated in my comments. I never felt like, I kind of just thought that people were like patting me on the head, or like didn't really see any sort of, you know, wisdom in someone who was so young. And I kind of strove to try and do the opposite once I became a little bit older, is to take those younger girls who felt that same exact way. And because they've only ever been stuck with teen groups or with the youth minister, that how do we integrate them into the ladies group eventually without them feeling small and like they don't have a voice until they're married or with children, or even, you know, we were just talking about when we were back in New York, there were times when the men would make people Zach's age and my brother's age who have wife and children feel as though they're incompetent and they shouldn't be up there doing sermons and things like that. And it was, you know, it's almost like each generation has this oppressive nature of like, well, I have more wisdom. And I think as a teen, they're already so insecure about speaking out, and they're already so insecure and maybe unsure about like where they stand in their faith. And maybe they will say the wrong thing because they're young and they're still learning, but it is creating those safe spaces for them with, you know, and the Bible has examples of, you know, older women teaching the younger women who teach the younger women. And like, that's how it's supposed to be. And it's like, at what point, you know, I remember a lot of churches we visited where it was like a college class, but they changed it to college age, because it's like at some point you're supposed to be cut off from this group of people your similar age. And then after college, you're just like absorbed into the congregation and you have like no one to relate to. And you have to sort of like find those people for yourself. And it can be really hard, you know, when you're stuck in, you've got 50-year age gap sometimes in these adult classes, and teens are the first step into that adult, you know, age group. And I think they can get lost in that. And so it's important to be able to bring them in without making them feel irrelevant, because it is important for them to feel relevant, like we're talking about, and make them feel like their voice matters, because that's a big thing in youth, but also just today is like your voice matters and you can make a change and things like that. And if the church isn't allowing serving opportunities for young men, or, you know, even serving opportunities for young women in these groups and, you know, with children or whatever it is that they're passionate about, we'll lose them. We'll lose them in the kind of the mix of their transition to adulthood.
Yeah.
It's very personal for me, because I feel like I could have been on that fringe. And there are a handful of things that I think kept me rooted. Some of that was my family. Like I think having a good family root in that, but I felt all of that, and it feels like it could be yesterday for me. Like I remember all that very vividly. And so it's kind of something that I get very passionate about, because it's so real, you know, and it's very amplified, because everything in teenagers is amplified. So we have to be, it's almost like a delicate situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we got to realize like belonging doesn't just mean like included, like you can come to our class. Belonging means like validating and even like recognizing that they might not only be as smart as you, but maybe even smarter than you in certain things, and just like honoring their thoughts. And like I mean, I remember, I remember like doing little things as a young boy or young man, and you have the people come up to you afterwards, and they're being encouraging, and they're like, oh, you did a good job, and that can be good, but I want to know, like, can we go farther than even that? Like the little platitudes that come from the heart and are nice, but like our job's not done. Like just because we say, oh yeah, like you teens or you young adults, yeah, you can come to the adult class now, or that was a nice little comment you made. Like, let's keep going farther. What would actually make them feel like they belong? And I think, oh yeah, go ahead.
I think feeling like you belong is when you start developing relationships with people and you kind of get to know them. And that's really hard to do at church. You can greet people, but you don't really get to know them. And so I don't have an answer except that just the outside getting together really helps, Yeah. And I've gotten close to people over Zoom. I sat behind Stan for quite a long time. When I came back to Newburgh, and I didn't know Stan until we did Zoom together. We've been doing Zoom for a year now.
Woohoo! Woohoo!
Woohoo! I know about your cat and all the stuff. So you find something in common, with someone. So yeah.
Yeah, you are right on. We are headed in that direction. Lorinda.
Yeah, just to add to that, you can't get to know them at church. It's not a space where that can really happen. You just say, hey, how you doing? I made it a big point when we were in youth ministry and stuff. We would have girls' night. It was just me and a bunch of girls over their house. It was chaotic. It was crazy, but I got to know them. I got to know what was going on. I'd pull a couple inside, hey, how was your week? And they would actually tell me how their week was. Not just that it was good.
You could be real.
Actually open up. Yeah. Because pick flicks, painting nails, and eating lots of chocolate is, it helps.
Yeah.
So getting out of doing things like a girls' night or taking one kid out somewhere that's not the church building to make that connection is really important.
Yeah. And this probably for some people would be terrifying, but honestly, the best way to really get to know someone and make them feel like they belong is to just start making good memories with them. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about how do you get to know someone, it's not through some kind of information pamphlet. Sometimes it's not even just a conversation. It's conversation with experiences. It can almost be a little scary to like sit down, like almost like a first date where you maybe you take a teen out to ice cream and you're sitting across from each other. What do you like to do? And you're just like interviewing each other, and that can work. It's not super natural necessarily, but the more positive memories that you can and experiences you can start making with young people, they're going to know that they belong because you're investing in them. Zach, were you going to say something?
Yeah, one thing that I love about this generation is because of all the tech and TikTok and YouTube and all the like algorithm stuff that's on phones and online now, is there's so many people out there making like videos on like little like trades. Trades are huge again, like woodworking and art, like different kinds of art, and like so many young people I know now know how to like crochet and stuff that like a lot of people in the older generations would be like, this just isn't interesting, like they're just playing video games. Like that's just not true. Like people love to learn how to do like artisan things again, like how to make jelly. Like that's really cool, and growing like a garden is really cool. So I feel like there's so much opportunity. They're just watching videos, like kids are just watching videos on these people doing like restorations of rusty tools and stuff, because it's just kind of fun to watch. So all of those, like, it doesn't just have to be going to get a meal anymore. You know, it can be fishing, it can be gardening, it can be learning how to crochet, knit, whatever. Like that's kind of like I think it's kind of might be like you might have some finesse on how to like offer that, and not be like, hey, you want to learn how to like carve, you know? But there is like there's like an interest for that again. It's not lame to have like cool hobbies, you know, and that's really fun to like share and teach.
Yeah.
Younger folks, you know.
Yeah, that's very true. Another quick example of that, like, really, I think what Zach is describing is just like wondering about their interests and getting involved in that. Elliot Rockwell, you guys probably know him, Josh and Amy's son. You might be surprised to know that he has a YouTube channel. And one thing he's passionate about right now is doing stuff and recording and editing it and putting it on YouTube. And I mean, you could schedule a time with his parents and take him out to lunch and sit across from the table and ask him questions that he's going to feel really awkward and scared to answer. Or you could go on YouTube, find his channel, watch all of his videos, and then you could go up to him on Sunday and say, hey, Elliot, I checked out your YouTube channel and I subscribed to it. And I really liked your video of the cat mansion that you built. Can you tell me how did you do that? Like, how'd you do that with the time lapse? And if you just did that for the next 30 minutes, he would be talking to you about YouTube and what he loves to do and who he likes to watch and what his next video is going to be about. And boom, you're in, you know? You've made a connection with him, and you're on his good side. You've earned his trust. Stuff like that, and we'll talk more about like specifics and stuff. I think I'll just save the next two for next session, I guess. I mean, we've gone a little over, which I appreciate you guys sticking with it. We've already kind of started talking about some of these things. They can really mix together. Belonging. How, maybe for next week, this will be our homework, is coming up with an answer to the question, how do we help young people feel a sense of belonging in our community? Let's talk about that question. How do we help our young people feel a sense of belonging in our community? How do we empower them? Those two questions. Belonging, accompaniment, being with them, and empowerment. That's what Paul did with Timothy. So we'll just kind of wrap those things up and then get even more specific on really the next session I'm calling How to Be with Young People. So that's what we'll do next time. Any final thoughts, words of wisdom? There's Roland getting ready for bed. It's about that time.
Good job, youth minister.
I can't do it without you guys.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, Kyle, we really enjoyed this class. You're doing a great job.
I'm loving it. I like the teens and all, but it's nice to get a break from them too.
I was thinking of Secret Sisters, how people sign up and they get matched up, and it was like we need to do something with teens and then a different, generation.
Yeah.
like figure something out where we could get matched up,
Once COVID is over, I have an idea for a class where we get teens and I'll just say old people together. Sorry, that's kind of derogatory, but it'll be a class where we'll have some kind of devotional stuff, and there'll be some like, "Hi, Joel." There'll be some,
Are we classified as old
dating
people?
questions.
I just need to know.
What?
Are we classified as old people?
No, not you. Just these guys. But the
Dan
kids will sit down with older people and
Cheese,
like
guys.
help them understand how to use their iPhone or their iPad or how to use their email. Like just do tech stuff that they really know how to do.
Let's
And
talk TikTok.
yeah, get them to teach you how to do those things and different apps and all that stuff, and just form relationships through that.
Oh,
You know, through those experiences. But I'm excited to do that, and it also means I don't have to teach a class.
huh.
Okay.
I like Jennifer's idea to have the teens teach us how to. Is that what you're saying? Do a TikTok video
Oh
with
man,
adults.
I would love that.
Oh.
They always try to get me to make TikToks with them, and I'm like, no way, you know.
Yeah.
But if you guys do it, you're in.
We'll do it, Jennifer, won't we? Come on, Jim and Janine. You bet.
Oh, wow. We
All right, guys. Thank you.
That would be
And I guess we'll see you next week.
All right.
Okay. I'll try and stay awake Sunday.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
I am preaching Sunday, so don't
No
spend it
falling
wrong.
out of windows.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.